If you walk down the aisles of a Best Buy, if anyone ever goes into Best Buy, but you walk down the aisles of a Walmart or a Target, there are a lot of entrepreneurs who have created product that are just quite simply the product you see in front of you.
Well, try a Rolex dealer. I mean, that's hardware, right?
Right.
There you go. And look at the margin on that.
It's phenomenal margins. They sell every Christmas. They sell for Father's Day, for Mother's Day, for Valentine's Day. There are very specific times at which, but the growth trajectory is based on, can you sell more units? And I think what data sort of changes for people is that the nth+1 version of a product you've sold now is not just on its own a 30% margin sale, but instead you collectively have n+1 data collection devices out there. And nobody wants the data from 100 cell phones. They want the data from 100 million cell phones, which means that each time that you sell one more, you're worth significantly more, whereas with Rolex, it was purely just around that brand. You still have to go sell, if you sold 1 million watches this year, you better sell 2 million watches next year. So I think data, it has a nice stacking effect.
Right.
So as you go ahead and
But what are some specific ways in which companies can?
So you can, people who are out there turning their products into the Trojan horses for building platforms. So if you look at someone like Nest or DJI, they physically sell their product at a margin, but really at the end of the day, people are trying to build software on top of DJI as a platform or on top of Nest as a home automation platform. You can use data to sort of build a razor blade model. If you have a connected device, think about Keurig and think about how much better Keurig would be if it had the data of everyone's consumptive behavior. Right now, it's just a disconnected device, but the future of hardware companies are using that data to make more intelligent decisions, to maybe send you a different cup of coffee based on your tastes or what the weather is like or when you're going to run out. And then the last is really just a far more fundamental data sale, which is saying, I have enough data to be able to help people make decisions. So either you're the one making the decision, so you build a closed loop system where you eventually have enough data that your system can become more intelligent. You turn to someone who is a buyer of that data, and it may not be your direct customer, right? It may not be the person you initially sold the product to. It might be a hedge fund or an insurance company or a municipality or the government of the United States of America, as several companies have found they can sell direct. But I think that fundamentally those all are predicated on being connected devices, and I think just going back to it, we see a lot of great entrepreneurs building products that are not connected, and I guess the one common theme here is, if everyone here is interested in data, I think there's a fair assumption that everyone here has connectivity, and that just
there's a couple of points there that I'd like to extrapolate on.
Yeah.
First of all, on the physical side, we're human beings and we live in a physical world. So I don't think we're ever going to get past buying devices and whatever. On the data side, it has to be consumable. And we're full of data. That's not the point. The point is, how can you make your decisions on that? How can it be digested for you? And in that sense also, I'd like to talk about machines talking to machines, because that's where really the IoT is going.
Interesting.
And let me just take it up a notch as I kind of referee you two, which I never get to do because I'm usually the incendiary one on the panel. So what I would say is the biggest challenge I think we see is solutions looking for problems. And when you're working with a solution cell, the seamlessness of the data as well as the hardware become clear. And I think Joyce is going to tell you about her solution at some point here, which it's the output, not the input tool set that makes the difference. And I think, one of the biggest challenges we've seen in some of the IoT hardware space, and I encourage you all to check us out on Twitter. I think earlier today we put out a great tweet on some of the challenges that are running in. So that's advancedventures.com. We look at this and say, hey, where are the holes? And the biggest one is solutions looking for problems, meaning that, is this a really big problem that this piece of hardware or software is solving? And I think at the end of the day, the solution cell allows for enough reasonable margin. And in fact, the interesting part is hardware can be a Silicon Valley story if it's part of a solution sale, because actually, hardware can have very predictable margins, whereas software can have very large margins. And if we get both of you together, we have a great company.
Yeah. Well, on that topic, Joyce, you brought your device to show everybody.
Yes.
Joyce is the CEO of Motion Loft, as she mentioned, and I was hoping you could just say how do you pitch Motion Loft to investors? You have both hardware, you have proprietary hardware, and you also have a suite of software tools that enable you to track the motion of cars and people, and that's what your customers value, right? So.
Yes, so as soon as you start talking about sophisticated hardware, this is an example that people think you sell hardware. And the first thing I say to investors is we don't sell hardware. The hardware is an enabler to get you that newly created data that's never been available before. So now if you're talking, why do we design and manufacture our own hardware? That should be the real question. And it's, for me, the decision was, I want to give our engineers the most powerful device they could possibly use to create the most wonderful solutions and to develop on. And that's why we have a what I call platform as a service, that we do the whole thing. The customer should not have to worry about what piece of hardware should I pick out. You don't want to have that customer go through an education process. They just want to solve their business problems. Or if you're a consumer, you just want to solve your individual needs. And if you focus on that and what data you're producing on that, then you start to have a real winner.
Interesting. Yeah. So when you guys, as VCs, when you look at a company like Motion Loft, what are the questions, the key questions that you're asking yourselves about how they're using data? Any red flags that Joyce's pitch there just brought up to you guys?
Well, I wouldn't immediately go into the Shark Tank jump after you and say.
Which, by the way, since Mark Cuban is her lead investor, man, you got nothing on her. Because not only did she survive, you know.
That is fair. It makes for good TV. But what I would say is, we look at things more fundamentally. If you're looking at a business case and a consumer case, you really want to have a very compelling use case that doesn't involve the data, right? I mean, if you even look at one of the greatest data collection tools of all time, it's Facebook. And nobody thought, oh, I love Facebook because it's a data collection tool. And if you look at even some more modern ones like Foursquare, they collected their data by making a fun game out of checking into restaurants, which essentially created this unbelievable data set for Foursquare to monetize on. And what I would say is for our hardware investments, if you look through the companies that we've invested in, because we're basically investing entirely in hardware companies, so it's not like I have a problem with hardware businesses. Our portfolio speaks for itself. But when you really peel back the onion on those and you say, okay, well, what makes this compelling? I agree. It's a software-enabled hardware, or it's a hardware-enabled software business. And when you look at certain of those companies, like for example, we're the initial investors in Shaper Tools. So Shaper is a handheld CNC router. It is the first time you have a power tool that is using computer vision and machine learning to basically auto-correct for human errors. The user, all they hear is, that's a autocorrect handheld router. Like, all they hear is like, that thing makes me a better woodworker or a better power tool user. In reality, behind the scenes, the system is becoming far more intelligent, and everyone who buys the next router is better off than the previous one. Or Mashgin doing computer vision-based self-checkout. Everyone who's standing in a store line can look at a clerk with a line of 10 people waiting to check out, or a line that's moving 3 times as fast because you just lay down all the products and in 4 seconds, your transaction's complete. The value proposition for the end user is very clear, whether it's the business or the consumer. And then once you have ubiquity or you've hit scale, then you're reaching a level where you have a moat built around your business that is the data you've been collecting over that year, 2 years, 3 years, however many users you have.
Right.
You know, well, I'm gonna kind of fight with you because
sure, I love it.
Let's go. So I think our challenge there, especially looking at the router and so on, are those venture businesses. And I think the biggest challenge when we look at things like a boutique or a niche play like that, is it going to deliver the venture return level that we seek? right? And that's often where you end up with the hardware, software solution sell, because in those two, there's a meaningful enough margin. It's got that scale capacity, which is what you were getting to. And so I think the most important thing is to understand that not all businesses are venture businesses. Not all businesses should ever have venture capital in those businesses. And you can build a really great company without messing it up with us. So at the end of the day, I think part of the equation is to understand where you fit in the financial ecosystem. And this is a phenomenal time for you as entrepreneurs, arguably the best time to start a company in history. There are accelerators, angels, micro VCs, government-related sponsored events. I mean, there are so many ways to kind of get your products out there. And really specialists like Avidan. I mean, he's a guy that could be out running Intel, frankly, and yet he's going to give... But
no interest.
So he likes giving you money, and he's going to give you advice. So it's a really great time, and I think that the most important part of that is you don't always have to strive to be the VC-related company, where it's finding the solution. And believe me, if you're super successful, we'll come find you. We're really good at that.
But I mean, is it fair to say that if somebody's coming to a VC and they have a data and hardware company, that one of the things you're looking for is a system that's learning over time how to be better and how to provide services better, based on what you said?
I think the other way to look at it is it scales, right?
Yeah.
It scales fast, and it has that up and to the right movement, which is, a lot of people are skeptical when they look at hardware companies and they say, okay, well, great, you did, we have companies that did 6 million in sales in their first year.
Yeah.
And everyone's like, okay, but can you do 26 million next year? And for a hardware business, that's a really tough pitch. But if what you did was plant a bunch of, tiny little Trojan horses all over, and it's a land and expand where you have one piece of hardware to 1,000 customers, but each of those customers have the potential of ordering 1,000 more.
Yeah.
That is an interesting opportunity. But I would say we get a lot of, there's a reason that we exist as specialists, is that most VCs don't get it, right? Most VCs are looking at it going like the router. I mean, your reaction is totally typical. No, I'll tell you the story.
Well, but I was going to help you out because I was about to tell you that the biggest M&A transaction so far this year has been a hardware deal in tech.
There's 7.
So there you go, man.
No. There's
there
7.
You go.
Keep going, right?
Well, but the biggest.
So Mobileye, right? But
yeah.
But I mean, if you look through, no. So I agree, but and then on top of it, if you look at the last 4 months, it's GE spending almost $3 billion on hardware-related companies, whether it's RCAM or Concept Laser or whatever. I mean, they're basically buying up in that space. I totally agree. But we went to VCs on Shaper tools and people were like, I don't know how big that market is, right? Because in California, people aren't into woodworking, I guess, and they didn't understand that it's the second largest hobby in America, and the beauty of it is that we were able to do a pre-order campaign that, that's what I would say is a lot of people, we can't invest in every awesome hardware company, but the opportunities you have to prove yourself without necessarily coming to a VC, and the do it on your own model actually works. We're seeing companies bootstrap their way up and getting significantly further along, so they don't need to go to guys like us and explain, oh, I got this great, consumers want this really badly, and I'm gonna be able to prove it.
Well, and that plays too, it's really easy to do that. No, I was just saying that plays is the best time for you because you can go out and 3D print prototypes, you can crowdfund it, you can sell things in social media, and then come to us and tell us we were wrong, because that's a really good way to start a conversation with us, honestly, because we're okay with that. We like to be wrong.
I love it.
Especially if you're making a lot of money.
It's strong opinions loosely held. We all sound like we're really confident that we know exactly the way the world is going to work out.
Oh, we totally make this stuff up as we go along.
If you look at the stats, we're wrong 90% of the time.
That is our stat.
Right?
90% is good.
Right?
I mean, 90%, we're killing it, guys.
No, wrong.
Can we get back to Nerdland for a little bit and talk about data? Yeah, okay. So can we have some examples of companies maybe who you think have used data particularly effectively? So hardware companies that have either done this aggregation thing really well or the razor blade model really well, aside from MotionLoft, of course.
Well, let me tell you about some of our strategic partners who really have we think about data and creating data, but how about the companies that already have data, and think about how you can partner with them. So we're partners with General Electric, for example, in their smart cities. They have what they call a predix platform, and that's a conglomeration of data points, including motion lofts, that they feed into that. We have a strategic partner, NCR, which owns the entire. They're the 800-pound gorilla owning cash registers and ATMs. You know how much data flows through that kind of transaction level point of sale data. We have another company called INREX, which captures all the GPS data in your cars, and they can tell where you've come from and where you're going. So these are all plays where you say, okay, Motion Loft is a little company. How come you have GE, AT&T, INREX, NCR as partners? It's because we're providing a certain level of data that they don't have and makes their data more valuable. So think about leveraging data of these great big hardware companies as well.
That's interesting, yeah. Any
I mean, everybody's
examples?
got, pull out your iPhone. I mean,
Yeah,
there you
sure.
go, right?
Of
I mean,
course.
as Avidan said, as you post something right now on Facebook with your iPhone, everybody's working together in that equation. But I think when you look at the end-to-end solutions, you can come out to some really basic examples. I mean, I think Fitbit was one of the first to get out the door. But really, this was just a way of making this connected device, easy to consume, easy to think through. But connected devices have been going on forever. I mean, many of the companies Joyce just mentioned to you have been doing connected devices for the last 30 years, right? I mean, they've just become easier, cheaper, and more efficient to connect. I mean, when I was an entrepreneur, we built the first touchscreen connected gas pump, okay? So, it's been going on for a long time. It's just now become so ubiquitous that you're able to get out there and have smaller companies, internet and IoT enable a router, right? And then figure out whether the market's there for it.
Yeah, so I have a couple examples, but I think the ones that are fun for me are the ones that I built myself, just because I was having a lot of fun.
Yeah.
So I built a barbecue that was connected to Twitter, and the idea was that I could collect all the data based on the temperature, the internal temperature of my brisket, as related to the temperature of my smoker. So is anyone here a barbecue fan? I mean, come on, you guys eat barbecue, right? And the difference between a barbecue that melts in your mouth or is you have to chew for a minute and a half is the difference between somebody who knows how to control the temperature or not. And then on top of it, it's very dry. So what I did was I built a logger I just used a Raspberry Pi, and I logged the temperature and humidity of the smoker and watched as my brisket rose in temperature as I was heading towards 180, and then all of a sudden it just stopped. And I was for hours, it was just stuck at 150. And I was okay, I can figure this out with data, right? So first I did a bunch of research on the, actual organic materials of meat and sweating, and realized that it was related to humidity. So essentially what was happening is my humidity levels were rising and actually cooling the meat. So the meat started to sweat, and then the airflow from the smoker was cooling it down. So I'd get to 150, the meat would start to sweat, and just like when you sweat on the beach, it cools you off, but if you sweat in the jungle, it doesn't cool you off. So basically what I did is I figured out what the temperature curve was, and I just slammed it with steam at 150.
Okay, this is a data wonk right here, who just turned making dinner
next level
into Star Trek episode.
And we did the same, and then we turned to the coffee machine and
Avidan
realized
does not represent the venture model. I just like to come right out.
that is, I would have it no other way, because I mean, look, I'm a hardware junkie and data science junkie from the 90s. I mean, I was working on cable modems, and I was developing SNMP, which is the network monitoring protocol, so that we could track how cable modems were being used. And I should tell you that it was all pictures of kitty cats. And pictures.
That's
of other,
enough, man.
Pictures
no
of
more
other
pictures.
Yes.
No more pictures. All
It
right,
was pictures.
we're going to move back to Joyce now.
Yeah.
No, but
Who runs a real business in this?
Yeah.
No barbecue.
well, but I mean, really, when you think about it, that was the beginning of connectivity and data, right? Like, we essentially were deciding how the internet would be structured because we knew how people were using their home connections. Everybody told us we were crazy when we wanted to put 1.5 megabits into people's homes. But we knew, because we were tracking the data about how people were using those internet connections, we knew how to architect a fiber network that would cover the United States and give people internet connectivity at home.
And then
Had we not been able to monitor...
And then never did it because like the Koreans and the Japanese figured it out and put it in.
What are you talking about? AT&T did it.
It's not
AT&T ended up, well, there's a large debate. We now have, it wasn't well, okay, I don't know which Japanese you're referring to.
High speed.
But I should say that, like, that connectivity and that data to me is like what defined a lot of where we are today, is to be able to make intelligent decisions using the data that we're able to collect.
Right. So,
Right, but
so
I
what are a
think-
couple other examples of small companies, like recent
Small companies
that
that are
they've been doing
using
it well?
that are using data well, I think, you know, it's hard. They're very few. The honest truth is, like I said, I'm a skeptic because when you look at people who are just, their core product is great. This is the thing, is like in the B2B space, there are people who are just, quite simply, you're saying, look, I'm putting data collection devices around your facilities and I'm giving you insights, not data. You're giving them insights.
Mm-hmm.
You're not giving them data, you're giving them count of how many cars,
It's
how many
providing a
people.
solution. It's
Right.
a solution.
And so I think that it's few and far between, especially on the consumer front, where somebody is just purely selling data. Right? We've seen a couple companies who are doing weather stations, and they said, once we have universal coverage across the entire United States, well then our data is valuable. And I was like, but until you get to that point, no one wants to buy a sparse data set.
Well, but you just touched on an important thing where there was this historic model that suggested that when startups were created and funded, as they grew, they'd collect all this data and they could go figure out and create this new monetization mechanism on top of their core business around the data. That very rarely, if ever, turned out to be a business. So much so, a great example is Salesforce owns data.com, et cetera. And they were like, well, we'll be able to go sell this data. Well, you know, it turned out it was much better to just go sell Salesforce software than it was to actually try and build a business around the data. It was a byproduct of. Now, if the solution itself and the outcome is the collection and then delivery of data as a solution, well, that's the standard model that we see out there. But I mean, when you talk about data coming off things, I think Joyce touched on it, cash registers, ATMs, credit card readers, Uber is the combination of hardware and software and so on. So I mean, you know, you can go all the way from GoPro to Fitbit, but you can get as boring as the fact that many things have two-way communications and have for many, many years, you know?
So
Data
there's
go ahead.
something that we really haven't discussed at all. There's data and then there's actionable data.
Right.
So one of the real power that we do have at MotionLoft is we serve up our data in real time. That makes it actionable. And what the heck does that mean? That means if I'm waiting for a bus and I can understand whether the bus is coming or not, I can decide whether I'm going to wait or not. And the bus driver can decide whether he needs to stop or not and save fuel, for example. You can send alerts, you know, there's all kinds of things. So it's not about data that's just being collected and residing somewhere and then you're comparing it to something. Can you take action on it? And I think that's where some of these hardware devices that are probably being shown right in this conference here can really start to understand, how is my device making things actionable? How is it making the experience of the consumer, of the fan, of the citizen better? You get into that kind of thinking, now you're starting to become into a real business model.
And that's a good point.
I agree fully on the idea of actionable data, right? Because if you're just giving somebody another data dashboard, but it doesn't tell them what to do, like for example, we looked at an amazing garbage tracking company. And what they did is they put a sensor inside of garbage cans, but their product wasn't garbage can tracking, it wasn't knowing how much garbage was in any of the systems or any of that data. All they did was route planning for garbage trucks. That was their service. They said to the municipality, all we give you at the end of the day is a more efficient route of picking up trash. You don't need to know how full your trash cans are, because that doesn't matter. All you need to know is which ones to pick up. And what they were able to do was save them money on the route that they picked up, right? And we talked about this yesterday. Twizzler apparently saved $1 million because they figured out how to more efficiently give you exactly 20 grams of licorice, because they previously were overshooting. But they were able to sit there and they instrumented their equipment, they collected all the data, and they basically used a closed loop system where they made an adjustment to the temperature of the hot licorice, and making that adjustment, then reading the output, and eventually they got to the perfect set of parameters where they were getting exactly 20 grams, and therefore you didn't get extra free licorice. So they saved money.
Right, but this is all a fairly recent model, which is in, I don't know if Joyce is going to tell you what's inside her magic box over there, but at the end of the day, a lot of this only occurs because historically we collected mountains and mountains and mountains of data, but the speed at which we could process it to make it actionable and actually deliver it in this format didn't exist. And now with the advent of GUIs and AI on chip and being able to process what we call in mem, meaning near real-time speeds, are we actually able to get that value? I mean, so this has been sort of the culmination of a lot of different pieces of a very big puzzle coming together. You had to have sensors and connected devices to collect data. Then you had to have speedy things at the edge of the network to actually deliver actionable data. And then you had to get those pieces together and actually add some value into the process by solving a big problem. And those big problems aren't always the most obvious consumer-centric problems, because I just got a connected toothbrush, and that is not solving anything more than blinking lights for me, okay? In the meantime, Joyce over here, they're counting people walking on the subway track. So, it is often the less obvious solution. Garbage cans, I mean, maybe all of you have smart meters on your home today. That allows for much bigger things, like all of us to have power because they can manage the grid better. So there's a lot of ways that data, if processed correctly. So this was a culmination of things that created data and captured data, then a mechanism to actually now go ahead and process it. And then what we're seeing the next wave of, which is big data analytics, and more importantly AI on top of that, which are finding mechanisms to not only process it, but make it actionable in the way we want. And I think you were touching on that, Avidan, when you were saying it actually making it personal.
Yeah, I mean, when you think about it, why did Google give away TensorFlow? Right? It's crazy. They gave away like years of research, millions, tens of millions of dollars of research. And it's because they knew that the real value was a proprietary data set.
Well,
and the only company that has
like a 99% margin on AdWords. I mean, but but with TensorFlow, they weren't dummies, right? They could have given away so many things about what's core to Google's innovation, but they gave away the algorithm, which is a really big comment. It's basically saying it's not about the algorithm. We've moved from having intelligent algorithms to intelligent data sets. And if your data sets are tagged properly, and they're high quality data sets, which Google has the largest of, Google has the biggest data set in the world, right? Well, but they invented the whole crack model in software, right? Everything they still have is beta, right? The first one is always free, and then next thing you know,
you think they're going to start charging for TensorFlow?
I'm not saying that. I'm saying that they're trying to get people in their platform. So you're inside the Google ecosystem.
No, but you don't have to be with TensorFlow. TensorFlow is an open source. No. See, I would have agreed with you on that. But they didn't take that model because they could have made TensorFlow a service.
I'll give you one word. Amazon. And anything that can keep people from shifting over.
But I can run TensorFlow on AWS. That's what you're missing.
Sure, but Amazon's coming up with a number of the same software pieces in there, and they're trying to keep them out of that.
I'm not convinced. I'm not convinced. You could be very right, and history will tell us.
You're always wrong anyway, so don't worry.
No. This could be 9 of our 10.
I mean, like I said, we make this stuff up.
All right, let's shift gears a little bit.
Oh no.
Can we talk about data privacy briefly here? So Joyce, your company has data on motion of cars and people. Presumably, you have data from cameras, and it's stuff that it's very valuable to you, but clearly there's a privacy component there. Is that a concern for you at all? Do you guys?
So we've thought about that from day one.
Yeah.
And So first of all, even though it's a vision-based, got a camera in there, we don't store video. So it's an edge processing device, which means we take in the scene and then we immediately convert it into a data log and send it to the cloud. So and I always like to say, we want to know what you are, not who you are. We want to know, is that a man or a woman, young, old? We want to know, is that a car, a truck, a bicycle out there? So we want to know what it is, because that's really the power.
Yeah.
It's interesting to me, if you think about Facebook, that is we have all agreed to give away our privacy on Facebook. So if you opt into things, so the question of privacy is it done with your permission or not?
Yeah.
So anything that's opt-in, such as Facebook, privacy is not an issue. Anything where we're collecting data, privacy is an extreme issue.
So I have a great story for this data privacy one. All right, so I was speaking a couple months ago, and I recounted a very famous story about Scott McNeely, who about privacy, how he basically said there is going to be no privacy. The sad part is, in that room full of millennials, no one actually knew who the guy was. So that was a huge issue. He, by the way, founded Sun Microsystems and all these other things. So, at the end of the day, I think the concept of privacy is lost on later generations. And I think the question really becomes, what is privacy any longer? Because the minute you've uploaded a picture to Facebook, they've now completely mapped your imaging and you're there. The minute that you've ever logged into a Google product, they've now profiled you. So if you think about the internet and the fact that the average RTB, which is real-time bidding exchange and advertising technology, takes less than 70 nanoseconds now to actually put you as a person up and allow advertisers to bid on you and then serve you an ad before you even noticed any of that occurred, I think the question really becomes to what is privacy and what do you really care about? And I think what people are realizing today is that the value, or the millennials generation is realizing that value in privacy is actually less than you can imagine if you get something back for giving that up. And initially that was free software, free services, free internet, free whatever. But now they're realizing that that's commentary and feedback, etc. So it's very challenging to do it. Now, in the legal side, to Joyce's point, we're all going to hear about masking and unmasking and all that a lot. But just assume if you're interesting enough that anybody cares about you in that way, you're cool. Because I'm not. I mean, no one cares. They can track me in Heathrow and I'm a throwaway. So there you go.
Yeah.
Can't believe millennials are getting thrown under the bus here.
Yeah.
It is not, millennials are not the ones who gave up privacy. Privacy was given up a long time ago.
No, but they squared it.
Yeah, no,
before people would be like, oh my God, my privacy. Now they're like,
wait a second. Right, but the consumer, I mean, if you look at it, we were just following what our parents did. We were standing in the supermarket line, and all of a sudden, all of our food, everything we're going to eat for the entire week was laid out. This is you learn a lot about my mom based on what food she bought at the supermarket. You probably tell her ethnicity, how well or how poorly she feeds us. And then the clerk says, if you give me your information and let me track you, I will give you 5 cents off that can of beans and that can of corn, and without even thinking. My mom was like, absolutely. I will give that up for 10 cents.
Yeah,
because from her,
there was
it was
a
the
straight
value.
transaction there. I mean, she actually got a monetized value. Now Google's got your cookie, and you didn't get anything for that.
Yeah, you did. You got a search engine. That's
you got
not
beta
true.
software.
Come on, man. You were paying for box software at CompUSA 25 years ago. If that was free.
No. We were beta programming.
Right,
too,
but what I'm getting
the
at
stuff
is
worked the first time.
But what I'm getting at is we have given up privacy, and we've given it up for a very long time. It's just now we're able to sell it more often to more buyers for more value continuously. And
so what are you selling over there? I thought you were a hardware guy, man.
No, for sure. Look, I think we run into it a lot where our companies are like, all right, what does our license look like? Are we going to take people's data? Do we just safely assume that all consumers are willing to give it up? That they're willing to just say, take my data as long as you agree to it, because I think you're right. Once it's agreed upon, then sort of no holds barred, do whatever you want with it. But I think fundamentally, the question gets far more complex as camera providers who are a little less conscious than you are. I think you've done a fantastic job. Putting edge compute answers a lot of questions because a lot of people are doing a much cheaper version of that that don't take that security into account. They're just taking dumb cameras everywhere and they're plugging it into a smart hub or even doing it in the cloud and saying, you know what, we'll process it in the cloud. But that means they're sitting on a lot of personal data. You're doing a very good job as far as cleaning protecting people's privacy by not transferring personally identifiable information down the pipe.
I mean, but what even matters anymore? I mean, I think that's the bottom line. But where do you draw the line? Is it an electronic health record? Okay, I feel like that's probably some pretty personal stuff. I mean, or should we just really throw that out there and let insurance agencies bid on the fact that some of my pre-existing conditions, they can give me a better deal on? I don't know. I mean, you know?
Well, the operative word is always, is it anonymized data?
Yeah.
There you go.
But even crazier, if it's anonymized data, imagine all the Google cars driving down the road, right? And they start to pick up criminal activity because they're connected to the criminal activity records of every corner that crime is happening.
But if the data isn't in real time, it's not actionable.
No, but now it is.
Wait,
You have a machine learning algorithm that can identify what's potentially a crime happening.
Okay, but I'll give
Right?
you one better, which is actually a criminal actually called an Uber in which to get away from a crime. So
Well, he broke his
clearly
leg.
this
It
is
was
not working as efficiently as we'd like. If you could rip someone off and then call an Uber to take, you'd think that we'd get that nailed, right? But not really.
Yeah, I think the privacy question is I actually don't feel like I even have remotely close to an answer for it.
Yeah.
All I know is that we're heading down a path of people being willing. Your privacy is being paid more and more for, and as long as we're only offered one offer, we're offered you can either have this and you give up your privacy, or you can't have this.
Well, but what's the component of privacy matter anyways? My sense is anybody that is so scared of their privacy is living off the grid, growing really long beards, and like eating like sticks and stuff like that.
Do you want to tell us the last time you visited the doctor and what he had to say?
Sure, I'd be happy
What
to
about
get,
the last
you know what,
porn?
they're bidding on it because I got a CVS thing in the mail for $10 off a prescription that they definitely wouldn't know unless they figured that out somewhere.
There's a great example of what
guys,
happened
can we
last
stop for
week.
a sec?
Okay, this is a funny
Okay.
one. There's a great VC, I won't say his name, last week posted a very funny screenshot where he typed someone's name into Google and the first result was an adult, was a porn star. And he posted it and was like, Google needs to scrub their algorithms. And everybody else said, when I searched the name Heather, that's not the first result for me.
no.
Perhaps Google's doing a really good job of indexing your historic views. And that's a privacy, right? I don't
Wait, but where was the breakdown in that story? All right, the breakdown in that story was that guy sharing that screenshot because you know what, Google was more efficient for him than anybody else.
But what if Uber
What was his next
what
clip?
if he got into the car with his wife and kids and the Uber car, which is autonomous, had access to his search history and immediately said, I'm going to continue playing the last video you watched at home.
Well, then he probably should be a lot more transparent with his family because I think you're consuming hiding things versus privacy here. There's a difference between information privacy and sort
Isn't
of
that
like,
information privacy?
clearly it is privacy, but at what level?
I don't know. Yeah, I am.
So this is a hotbed of conversation.
Yeah, clearly.
You have
Thank
another
you,
topic?
Right? Sorry.
Wait.
Sorry
I want
to
to
run
make
that
sure,
direction.
because we only have 7 minutes left, I want to make sure we have time for audience questions. So please come up here to this microphone because this is being taped and we want to make sure that folks at home can hear you.
Leave on a high note. Sorry about
Yeah,
that.
exactly.
Paul Chatterjee from Media and Entertainment Technology. I'm one of the guys filming it. So a different take on the privacy question. You are discussing where privacy comes in from the consumer side. This is a show for design people and people who are creating products. From a business perspective, between the US rule that just changed yesterday on privacy and then the new rules coming in from Europe on their restricted, how are you helping people who may have a new hardware product figure out a business model that will allow them to collect data that they can globally sell that's not going to just be for Northern California, but they can go through?
Three answers. One, We don't encourage people to collect data and sell it. We want the solution. Second, the rule of thumb is don't get sued. 3, we refer you to really good lawyers who write really thick documents that you get everybody to sign and then get out of that question. But seriously, in terms of the data as it applies to where you're at right now, the number one factor you've got, and I think Joyce spoke to it well, is are you anonymizing and or masking data so that you're not directly attributing it to an individual, so you're anonymizing that, making it anonymous within your data set, number one. Number 2, if you are going to make a business out of selling data, which by the way most of us here already agreed wasn't really a business, there are a few. If you're going to do that, then you will be spending, one, you've got a hugely high margin because your product doesn't cost a lot in a lot of cases, but then you have huge legal bills because if you think about it, your competition is not another vehicle, another computer, another piece of software. Your competition is oftentimes a government or an individual class action suit.
Actually, I think I wanted to clarify the question. I think I misstated it. What I'm trying to get to is if you're making a hardware product, and in her case, she decided to do edge computing off of visual, how do you help people decide what is the sort of data I want to collect and maintain so it could be deemed an asset to the company in a structured form, because they're trying to sell a solution, not the data.
Go back to number 2, don't get sued.
Right.
Number 3, we'll refer you to an attorney who will write a really long user doc.
Just kidding. All right. So we'll say VCs don't provide guidance on this.
Hold on. No, hold on to everything. Store it all. Store it all.
Yeah.
It's the U.S. changed the rules yesterday for ISPs to store everything. But more than store it, sell it, right? And from our perspective, like I said earlier, the proprietary data set is what sets companies apart. We might not have an algorithm to figure out something interesting from that data today, but in 5 years from now, when we have a more critical mass of data, we're going to be kicking ourselves if we deleted all that old data that we can create actionable insights from. We're invested in a company that runs computer vision systems on manufacturing lines and takes every photo of every single injection molded piece of plastic, every single PCB, and keeps them all in full high resolution, pulls them out of China, because one day the AI systems for manufacturing are going to need that big data set. So hold on.
By the way, we have an AI guy that we should put together with your guy. So look how data is very valuable right here on the screen.
Thank you very much for your question. Anybody else?
Hey guys.
Hi.
Thanks for coming out. You get to see a ton of startups, right? They pitch you constantly. I'm curious what you think is going to be the next 5 big knockouts in hardware.
And we're just saying, so I'll do it categorically because I think that those are the kind of key areas, right? So from a category standpoint, health is just a knockout category because I think, the market is getting over a lot of the initial issues and it's kind of getting behind, so to speak, the EHRs, the medical record systems that control healthcare. So that's a number one dynamic there, right? The next one is autonomous anything. Right, because as we all know, we're talking about the Mobileye, et cetera. The next is the really going back to the silicon, which is moving everything to the edge, which is the ability to process in-memory in hardware, high speed, NVIDIA with their new AI chips, and the many that will come behind that, and then ultimately the use of computer vision as a whole, which is really just taking some level of imaging, capturing that data at a high density, and being able to process it and giving it actionably.
Industrial automation. So we're going to change the way all industry works. Industry hasn't received real investments, whether that's energy industry, manufacturing, construction, just big old boring businesses are going to receive some really needed attention. I think food is going to receive a lot of attention, not just ag, but we're invested in Momentum Machines, which is a fully automated robotic restaurant. So all of that sort of has a robotics layer. I don't think I'm going to give you 5, but it is computer vision is an enabler of so much of this. Machine learning is an enabler, and it's about the solution sets you can build with low-cost sensing, low-cost actuating, low-cost processing, and going after industries that have seen no love. Do not build drones. They have gotten plenty of love we're looking for people who are thinking about construction and thinking about manufacturing and thinking about container ships moving across the ocean that haven't evolved in 30 years.
Cool. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Yeah. We think we have time for probably 2 more questions. If you guys, yeah, you've got a whole line going there. Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for the session. Then in case of the startup that you described, right, that targeted woodworking specifically. So when you look at a sector which conventionally does not have any data coming in, and I'm assuming that's what they were also building, but the fundamental value proposition of the product was different. It was not just to generate that data in mass. That data probably gets valuable only when you have millions of units out there, right? So how do you test it out at a very early stage, right? Or do you just assume?
So specifically in that example, we fundamentally had to believe that the product on its own could be valuable enough to be venture scale. And the end of the story there was all the VCs said, oh, we think you might be able to do $1 million in sales on a crowdfunding campaign. And they broke that in the first 24 hours. So there is a huge market for it, and then did many, many multiples of that in their crowdfunding campaign. But the idea is there a large enough market to sustain it? For them, it's more of a Trojan horse for selling raw materials, right? The idea that you could sell instruction sets and raw materials and sell other products into the garage that aren't just the router. They might be the drill, they might be your laser level, they might be all of those things that need to become intelligent. Because if you look at Home Depot's 90+ billion in revenue, huge chunk of it is lumber and building supplies, right? All of those things where you have really high margins and you want to sell. So this is actually an opportunity to disrupt IKEA and Home Depot. We're not necessarily going to package up that data and sell it to a hedge fund who wants to figure out how Home Depot's doing. That's why I looked at that and said, I use a more loose definition of data. I'm not looking at that type of opportunity as a data opportunity. It has a core value prop.
Fair. All right, thank you.
Thanks. Yeah. Okay, I think we have to end there, everybody, but you can talk to these guys offline. Thanks so much for coming to our panel. Yeah. Have a good one.
Thank you, Beth.
Thank you, Beth. Great job.